So now that we've done the basic overview of the poem, we're going to get a little bit more in depth with a reading of the poem and interpretation of it. And, there are a lot of ways to read this text. There's always a lot of ways to read a text, but in this reading, we're really going to focus on the fatalistic character of this poem and the way it really drives home the unavoidability of cyclical violence, which is to say, this feud, retribution, you got me, so I'm going to get you. Beowulf really drives home how unavoidable that is, and that's a major theme of the poem. One of the things you see throughout the whole story is how these cycles of violence keep rising up and how they're really unavoidable despite the best efforts of everybody involved. Part 1, about the young Beowulf, sets up this conflict between the king Hrothgar, who believes in peace, believes that he can prevent violence, but who can't even protect his own home, right? Grendel is in there all the time. And the young Beowulf, on the other hand, who understands violence, who sees how it works, and is able to kill Grendel and his mother. Where Hrothgar is hesitant and tries to avoid violence, Beowulf is decisive and pursues violence, and Beowulf ends up being right, and Hrothgar is wrong. And we'll see some more examples of this in a second. In part 2, we see how the old Beowulf has become like Hrothgar in a lot of ways. As an older king, he thinks he can save his people, he thinks he can avoid violence, but all he ends up doing is inviting these invaders to destroy them. He kills the dragon, thinking that he's protecting his people, but in fact, his death then leads to their destruction. This isn't really so much something that is a criticism of Beowulf as it is, just something that was unavoidable. What was Beowulf supposed to do? Whatever happened, he could not, in the end, protect his people. And even his death in this incredibly heroic act, killing this monster, is not enough to protect them. This theme is actually visible in the poem from the very beginning, when we first get the description of Hrothgar building his hall, Heorot. You remember this passage: the fortunes of war favored Hrothgar, friends and kinsmen flocked to his ranks, young followers, a force that grew to be a mighty army, and so his mind turned to hall building. He handed down orders for men to work on a great mead hall meant to be a wonder of the world forever, and they built it, and the hall towered, its gables wide and high, and awaiting a barbarous burning. That doom abided, but in time it would come. Even before Grendel has attacked the hall, we are told that it is going to burn down. Heorot is doomed from the very beginning, even before Grendel attacks, even before Beowulf arrives. We know how it will be destroyed. And when the poet signals this at the very beginning, he lets us know that everything that happens, as heroic as it is in the moment, is not ultimately going to be enough to prevent the cycles of violence that inevitably destroy everything. Now, when we first meet him, it seems that the young Beowulf might be able to stop these cycles of violence, even despite this little indication we get at the beginning. When he arrives in Hrothgar's throne room, he says greetings, he introduces himself, and he tells him of his great triumphs. When news of Grendel reached him at home, when sailors brought him stories of the plight and how the legendary hall lay deserted, empty and useless, then every elder and experienced councilman among his people, the Yachts, supported his resolve to come here to King Hrothgar because all knew of his awesome strength. Beowulf, it seems, will be capable of defeating this monster Grendel, of driving it out of the hall once and for all, and saving it and protecting it. The contrast between Beowulf's can-do attitude and Hrothgar is implicit in that earlier slide, but really reinforced later on after Beowulf has killed Grendel, he's shown his strength and heroism, but Grendel's mother has come to kill Hrothgar's friend. in that conversation, this passage that we've already read, Beowulf tells Hrothgar not to grieve. He says, "It is always better to avenge dear ones than to indulge in mourning." Think about that. It is always better to seek out vengeance, to pursue violent solutions, than it is to indulge in mourning. For every one of us living in this world means waiting for our end. Death and destruction are coming to everyone. Let whoever can win glory before death. When a warrior is gone, that will be his best and only bulwark. The only chance to do anything worthwhile before you die is to win glory through violence. So arise, my lord, and let us immediately set forth on the trail of the Troll Dam to seek vengeance against Grendel's mother for the death of Ashura, which was itself vengeance for the death of Grendel. Let's go pursue this vengeance. I guarantee you she will not get away. So you see in this slide how Beowulf's can-do attitude, his abilities, his power, his facility with killing monsters is on the one hand admirable, right? He does save Heorot for a time at least, but it's also bound up in this tendency to create and perpetuate cycles of violence, which Hrothgar wishes to prevent, but which he is incapable of preventing. He needs guys like Beowulf or everything would fall apart.